Good evening from a village where gossip travels faster than the post. I wonder, from which part of the world are you joining us today? Leave us a note in the comments. We do love hearing from our listeners near and far. And don't forget to subscribe, so you'll never miss when the next bit of mischief blooms. It was the sort of Cotswold morning that made even the sheep look miserable. A soft drizzle hung over Carsely, smudging the honeyed stone cottages into shades of pewter. The hedgerows wept quietly, the lane gleamed with puddles, and Agatha Raisin, wrapped in a raincoat that had once been stylish in London but now looked too knowing for the countryside, strode toward Honeysuckle Row with determination. She had returned from London the week before, having once again attempted to rekindle her old PR glamour. It had ended, as these things often did, in disillusion and a bill for hair highlights that would have funded a small parish fete. What she needed, she told herself, was to re-establish her rural charm. That meant mingling, smiling, within reason, and proving to the village that she could still be one of them, if she ever truly had been. The opportunity had come neatly wrapped in pastel stationery. The Honeysuckle Row Beautification Committee cordially invites you to join our mission to maintain Carsely's most admired lane. Beautification, Agatha had muttered at the time, reading the invitation over a mug of tea, as if they could improve on their own self-importance. Still, she'd gone, partly from boredom, partly from spite. The committee met in Mrs. Claudia Trimble's conservatory, a shrine to cleanliness and floral domination. The walls gleamed, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and honeysuckle polish. Claudia herself sat at the head of the table, a woman of 60 with skin as taut as her gardening gloves and a smile sharp enough to prune roses. "We're so pleased you could join us, Mrs. Raisin," Claudia had said, the so stretched like elastic. "We do like to keep the street up to standard." Agatha gave her one of her winning smiles, the sort that had once sold shampoo accounts in Soho. "Oh, I'm all for high standards," she said, "though I find them easier to keep when one isn't surrounded by busybodies." The silence that followed could have fertilized an entire field. A younger woman with careful curls, Tilly Granger, who ran the village flower shop, giggled nervously. "Oh, you're so funny, Mrs. Raisin. Claudia, shall we discuss the rose borders?" Claudia's lips tightened. "Indeed. Honeysuckle Row must be the envy of all Gloucestershire this spring. Uniformity is the soul of beauty." Agatha raised an eyebrow. "I've always preferred individuality myself. That's what the London judges look for in the big garden competitions, you know." "We are not in London," Claudia replied frostily. "Nor, I suspect, do we wish to be." By the time the meeting ended, Agatha had managed to insult at least 3 members without quite meaning to, and enjoyed every minute of it. There was something invigorating about poking genteel egos. It made her feel alive. Afterward, as she and Mrs. Bloxby walked home together through the mist, the vicar's wife sighed in her gentle way. "You do realise, Agatha, that Mrs. Trimble has ruled that street like a monarch for 20 years. Every monarch needs a bit of rebellion," Agatha said briskly. "Besides, her idea of beautification is turning nature into a showroom. It's indecent." "Just take care," Mrs. Bloxby murmured. "Too much pride in one's begonias can lead to tragedy." Agatha laughed, though a flicker of curiosity stirred in her. "You make it sound as though someone might kill for a hanging basket." Mrs. Bloxby smiled faintly. "One never knows." That evening, Agatha sat by her kitchen window, watching the rain deepen to silver lines. She had spent the afternoon writing an indignant note to the committee, suggesting that perhaps Honeysuckle Row's rubbish bins could use beautifying too. She'd enjoyed sealing it with her best lipstick. Fritz the cat dozed by the fire. Carsely, at twilight, looked deceptively peaceful. The street lamps blurred in the damp, and the world smelt of wet earth and wood smoke. Agatha poured herself a modest gin and tonic, just enough to feel civilised, and pondered the curious power that women like Claudia Trimble wielded. It wasn't money, not exactly. It was the authority of those who never doubted they were right. She had seen their type in London offices, always the ones who arranged farewell parties and then leaked the gossip. They wrapped control in charm. Claudia, she suspected, could kill weeds and reputations with the same precision. At 9 o'clock, the telephone rang. It was Roy Silver from London, bubbling with energy. "Aggie, heard you've joined some rural junta, the Beautification Committee. Do send me a photo of you with a trowel, darling. It'll make a marvellous 'Where are they now' piece." "If you print one word," Agatha snapped, "I'll beautify your face with a brick." Roy only laughed. "Still feisty. Listen, I've a feature on English villages. Murder behind the manicured hedges. You'd love it." "Don't tempt fate," said Agatha dryly. "This place is deadly enough without your help." After she hung up, she found herself oddly uneasy. The rain had eased, leaving a low hush over the village. Through the darkness, she could just make out the faint curve of Honeysuckle Row, its gardens neat even in gloom. Somewhere, a dog barked once, then fell silent. She made another drink, half intending to ignore her nerves, but the quiet pressed close, thick as velvet. From habit, she double-locked the door, telling herself she was only being sensible. At 10, she noticed movement outside, nothing more than a shadow sliding past the window, too fast to see clearly. Probably one of the cats, she thought, though her heart gave an unhelpful thump. She went to the window and peered out. The lane stretched empty and pale under the lamps. Honeysuckle Row looked asleep, its cottages primly aligned like soldiers on parade. "Nerves," she muttered, turning away. "That's all it is, country air and too little excitement." But just as she reached the stairs, a sound sliced through the damp night, a sharp, high scream, shattering and brief. It came from the direction of Honeysuckle Row. Agatha froze. For a moment she thought she'd imagined it. Then another noise followed, the crash of something brittle breaking, then silence. She ran to the door, flung it open, and stood in the drizzle, listening. The village lay still. One by one, lights blinked on in distant cottages. Somewhere, a voice called, "It's only a cat." Another laughed uncertainly. Agatha hesitated, then fetched her umbrella and strode a few steps toward the row. The air was cold and smelled faintly of damp honeysuckle. She saw no movement, only the wavering glow of street lamps and the glisten of rain on stone. "A cat. My foot," she muttered. But even she wasn't bold enough to go poking into gardens at night. Not yet. When she returned indoors, she shut the door firmly, poured a third gin, purely medicinal, and stood for a long moment staring into the dark. Carsely had its secrets. It always did. And Agatha Raisin, restless and slightly drunk, felt the first small prickle of excitement. "Beautification," she said aloud. "We'll see about that." Outside, the rain began again, whispering against the glass like someone too polite to knock. The morning began as though the world had been washed in grey water. A thick Cotswold fog clung to the hedges, turning Honeysuckle Row into a soft blur of ghosts and gardens. Even the birds seemed reluctant to sing. Agatha Raisin, who had risen early with the intention of composing a triumphant letter to the Beautification Committee, she had drafted the phrase, "While your tulips may wilt, my initiative does not," was distracted by an odd sound drifting through the mist, urgent voices, and the low hum of panic that never suited English mornings. She pulled on her Mac, grabbed her handbag as if it were armour, and marched out. By the time she reached the Row, half the village had gathered outside Mrs. Claudia Trimble's immaculate gate. The air smelt sharply of soil and honeysuckle, mixed with something colder, shock. "What's going on?" Agatha demanded. A pale woman from number 3 clutched her dressing gown. "It's Mrs. Trimble. Poor thing, she's gone." Agatha, never one to linger on thresholds, pushed through the Gawkers. 2 uniformed constables attempted to block her, but she brushed past with the air of someone who had once managed celebrity crises and was unimpressed by authority. "I'm Mrs. Raisin," she announced briskly. "Friend of the deceased." It wasn't true, but it sounded official enough. The garden looked as perfect as ever, except for the body. Claudia Trimble lay sprawled beneath her prized arch of pink honeysuckle, her pastel gloves darkened by earth. A trowel rested crookedly in the soil beside her. The expression on her face was not peaceful, but indignant, as if death itself had broken committee rules. "Oh, heavens," Agatha whispered. Dr. Sims, the village GP, knelt beside the body, tutting quietly. "Heart failure, I imagine," he murmured. "She was over 60, you know." Agatha leaned closer, squinting through the fog. There, beneath Claudia's perfectly set hairline, bloomed an ugly bruise. "Heart failure, my foot," she said. "Please stand back, Mrs. Raisin," said one constable nervously. "Don't be absurd," said Agatha. "If she'd keeled over naturally, she wouldn't have fallen face first into her petunias. Look, her teacup smashed by the hedge. Someone brought her tea, and she never finished it." The constable looked bewildered. "Perhaps she dropped it." "Perhaps you'll drop your job if you ignore evidence," Agatha muttered. A familiar voice spoke behind her. "Agatha, leave the poor man alone." She turned to see Detective Sergeant Bill Wong approaching through the mist, his calm presence a balm and an irritation in equal measure. "Morning, Bill," she said. "Trust you to appear when there's something interesting for once." "That's my line of work," he replied mildly. "And yours, apparently." He surveyed the scene with professional weariness. "Doctor thinks heart failure. We'll see." Agatha crossed her arms. "You can see the bruise, can't you? Someone hit her." "Or she fell," Bill said, crouching to examine the ground. "Wet path, slippery shoes." "Claudia Trimble doesn't fall," said Agatha. "She descends gracefully when she sits down." Bill gave her a faint smile. "You know her well, then?" "Hardly, but she was the sort who made sure everyone else did." By now, more neighbours had appeared, gathering like curious hens. Agatha recognised several faces from the committee. Tilly Granger, the florist, stood near the gate, eyes wide and red. "I told her those trellises were unstable," she said tearfully. "Didn't I say so, Harriet?" Beside her, the formidable Harriet Pie, a square woman in a hat fit for a bishop's garden party, nodded grimly. "Indeed you did. The Lord takes prideful people down a peg when necessary." Agatha eyed her. "Bit harsh, don't you think? She's barely cold." "The wages of sin are—" began Harriet. "Oh, stuff the wages," said Agatha. "She was murdered. That's what she was." A few gasps fluttered through the group. Agatha saw Peter Blake lingering near the fence, the neighbour from next door, tall and neatly dressed, with the wary eyes of a man who disliked being looked at. "You were close to Mrs. Trimble, weren't you?" Agatha called out. Not particularly, Blake said. His voice was smooth but distant. She had opinions. I had peace. So no quarrels? None worth killing over, he said flatly. Now, if you'll excuse me. He disappeared into his house, shutting the door with careful finality. Suspicious, Agatha muttered. Bill sighed. You do realise I'll have to interview everyone you've just harassed. Consider me your advance team. The forensic van arrived, bringing a fresh bustle of uniforms. Dr. Sims reluctantly stood aside, mumbling about meddling amateurs. Agatha ignored him, kneeling briefly to inspect the ground near the broken teacup. Amid the soil, a sliver of gold paint glinted. A piece of delicate china. The pattern looked like a forget-me-not. She pocketed it before anyone could notice. Evidence, she said softly to herself. What was that? Asked Bill. Just admiring the craftsmanship, said Agatha innocently. By noon, the crowd had thinned, though gossip remained thick as fog. Agatha lingered near the gate, listening. Poor Claudia, murmured one woman. Such a perfectionist, always telling people how to mow properly. Did you hear? Whispered another. She'd written to the council about Peter Blake's extension, claimed it ruined the view from her conservatory, and she accused Tilly of stealing her compost formula. Agatha felt the hum of excitement that only a new mystery could bring. Every villager had a grievance. Even the meek Harriet Pie, moral guardian of Honeysuckle Row, had looked more smug than sorrowful. When at last the police cordoned off the gate, Agatha and Bill walked back toward the high street. You really think it's murder? He asked. Of course. People like Claudia Trimble don't die conveniently. They make an exit, and someone holds the curtain open. Bill smiled faintly. You're incorrigible. Let us do our job, please. Fine, said Agatha. But you'll thank me later when your heart failure case turns into front-page scandal. They parted at the corner, Bill heading to his car, Agatha toward her cottage. The fog was lifting, revealing Carsely's familiar jumble of roofs and gardens. Yet the village looked different now, as if a layer of innocence had been quietly scraped away. Back home, Agatha brewed tea, proper tea, strong enough to revive corpses, and sat at the kitchen table with the satisfaction of someone about to meddle. She placed the gold-painted shard on a napkin and examined it. Expensive china, delicate, not the sort Claudia would let the hired help handle. Heart failure, my foot, she murmured again. Her cat yawned from the hearth, unimpressed. Agatha's mind ticked through possibilities. The bruise, the cup, the neighbours, Peter Blake's polite disdain, Tilly Granger's jealous tears, Harriet Pie's righteous calm. So many motives sprouting like weeds in fertile soil. She picked up the phone and dialed Mrs. Bloxby. You heard, of course, she said without preamble. Yes, dear. Poor Mrs. Trimble. Such a pity. Pity nothing. It's murder. I'm sure of it. There was a small sigh. Agatha, do promise you'll let the police handle it this time. I will, up to the point where they start mishandling it. Mrs. Bloxby chuckled softly. Just take care. Pride and curiosity can both be dangerous garden tools. You're all becoming philosophers, Agatha grumbled. First begonias, now proverbs. When she hung up, the fog had cleared completely. Honeysuckle Row gleamed in the weak sunlight, tidy as ever. But Agatha knew that behind those perfect hedges lay resentment, envy, and secrets waiting to bloom. She straightened her shoulders. The police might call it an accident, but she had no intention of letting Claudia Trimble's death fade into polite silence. "Horticulture," she said, smiling to herself. "Homicidal horticulture." And with that, Agatha Raisin poured another cup of tea and began planning her next move. The morning drizzle had given up its ambition and settled into a patient grey mist, the kind that blurred the Cotswold edges and made everything look faintly respectable, even tragedy. Agatha Raisin stood outside Claudia Trimble's cottage, her mac buttoned high, her expression suggesting she might personally arrest the weather for impertinence. "It's hardly proper, barging into the poor woman's house," murmured Mrs. Bloxby, her gloved hands folded neatly over her handbag. "Nonsense," said Agatha. "We're not barging, we're investigating. Besides, if I wait for the police to get round to anything useful, we'll all die of old age." The constable on duty, a pink-faced youth with an expression of terminal politeness, blinked uncertainly as Agatha marched past him. Mrs. Bloxby followed, murmuring apologies in her wake. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and disinfectant, as though Claudia's obsession with cleanliness had survived her demise. The furniture gleamed, the vases stood perfectly aligned, and the carpet showed not a single thread out of place. "My word," said Agatha, eyeing the spotless surfaces. "It's like being trapped inside a sermon." "She was very proud of her home," Mrs. Bloxby said gently. "Pride, my dear, is how most murders start," Agatha replied. They found Claudia's desk in the conservatory, a prim little table with matching chair and stationery in pastel pink. A diary lay open, written in small, tidy script. Agatha flipped through the pages. Each entry was an essay in irritation. "Mrs. Pie's begonias vulgar as ever," she read aloud. "Mr. Blake trimmed his hedge again, encroaching 2 inches. Tilly Granger overcharges for marigolds. I must report her to the parish council." Good grief, she made enemies for sport. Mrs. Bloxby leaned over. "Here, look, this one." She pointed to a note dated 2 days before Claudia's death. "He will regret it." Agatha's eyes narrowed. "He? Which he? Mr. Blake, perhaps, or some poor man who failed to salute her flower beds. Or," Mrs. Bloxby said softly, "a lover." Agatha gave a short laugh. "Don't be absurd. That woman's idea of romance was a well-polished compost bin." Still, she made a mental note of the entry. One never knew. A movement outside caught her attention. A car pulling up, sleek and foreign, the sort of thing that looked too confident for a village lane. A moment later, Charles Fraith strolled in, looking tanned, amused, and entirely useless. "Aggie, my love," he said, leaning in the doorway. "I hear you've turned the parish into a murder mystery. Couldn't you have waited till I was back to take part?" Agatha folded her arms. "You're late, as usual. I suppose you've been wasting time in Monte Carlo or wherever idle aristocrats pretend to work." "Venice, actually," said Charles, undisturbed. "I was attending an art auction. Dreadfully dull. No one got murdered at all." He smiled. "But tell me about this tragic horticultural event. Did someone prune the wrong shrub and lose their life for it?" "If you've come to be irritating, you've succeeded," said Agatha. No, I've come to assist. I always find murder brings out my charitable side." "Your curiosity and your laziness," she said, but she was secretly pleased. Charles's company made her feel sharper, though she'd rather die than admit it. They moved back to the conservatory. Charles peered around with idle interest. "So, this is the late Mrs. Trimble's kingdom. Immaculate. Terrifying. I imagine even her spiders wore uniforms." Agatha ignored him and crouched to inspect the tiled floor. That was when she noticed it. a faint, muddy print by the door leading to the garden. Large, roughly boot-sized, out of place amid the otherwise surgical tidiness. "Look at that," she said, pointing. Charles bent to examine it. Not hers, certainly. She'd have been a size 5 at most. Exactly. Whoever it was didn't wipe their feet, and Claudia Trimble would have skinned them alive for that. Mrs. Bloxby frowned. "Perhaps one of the policemen." "No," said Agatha. "It's older. See, the edges have dried a bit. That print was made before the body was found." Charles gave a low whistle. "Clever girl. You're wasted on flower committees." "And you're wasted anywhere," said Agatha, though her cheeks warmed slightly. They took tea in Claudia's tiny kitchen, which seemed to have been polished more often than used. The kettle boiled with military precision. Agatha sat at the narrow table, glancing again through the diary. "Look at this," she said. "All these complaints, petty, vindictive, but they show something. She cared desperately about control. Someone must have threatened that." "And how thrillingly Freudian," said Charles, stirring his tea with languid grace. "So, who do we have on the suspect list? The jealous florist, the uptight neighbour, or the moral guardian who probably resented Claudia's godlessness?" "You've been reading my thoughts," said Agatha. "I try to avoid them," he said lightly. Mrs. Bloxby rose. "I think I'll leave you two detectives to your plotting. Agatha, do remember kindness, won't you?" Agatha looked faintly offended. "I'm always kind. Efficiently so." "Of course," said Mrs. Bloxby, smiling. "Just not always at the right moment." When she'd gone, Agatha poured herself another cup of tea. The fog outside had thinned into a silvery brightness, revealing neat gardens and twitching curtains. Villagers were already talking. She could almost hear the rumours growing like weeds. Charles, watching her, said softly, "You enjoy this, don't you?" "Enjoy what?" "The chase, the danger, being the clever one in the room." Agatha gave him a sharp look. "I enjoy justice, and I despise smug men who think they can charm their way out of contributing." "Then I'll contribute charm," he said. "Consider it field research." "You'll consider it an early grave if you distract me," she retorted, but her lips twitched despite herself. Later that afternoon, Agatha called on Tilly Granger under the pretence of ordering flowers. The shop was a chaos of tulips and gossip. "Terrible business, isn't it?" Tilly said, her eyes wide. "Some say Claudia had a secret admirer. Imagine, a man creeping up the path with roses." "Or poison," said Agatha. "Depends on the admirer." "Oh, you're awful, Mrs. Raisin," Tilly giggled. Then, lowering her voice, "Mind you, Harriet Pie's been acting odd. Said Claudia was under divine judgment. I wouldn't be surprised if Harriet had a hand in it. Always so righteous." "And you had no quarrel with Claudia yourself?" asked Skady Agatha. "None." "Well, only that she accused me of overcharging for her begonias. I told her it wasn't my fault if she didn't know the difference between wholesale and discount." Agatha left with a small bouquet and a larger suspicion that everyone in the village had loathed Claudia in some modest English way. That evening she met Bill Wong at the pub. The King's Head was busy, thick with chatter and the smell of chips. "You shouldn't be poking about," Bill said, though his tone was more resigned than stern. "You'll upset people." "They're already upset," said Agatha. "Besides, I've found a footprint in the conservatory and a diary entry that screams blackmail or affair." "You always think it's blackmail or affair," he said mildly, "and I'm usually right." Bill smiled into his pint. "So what's your theory this time?" "Someone she'd humiliated got tired of it," Agatha said. "Or perhaps one of her admirers learned she had none." "We've found no evidence of either," he said. "Then you're not looking properly." Outside, the night had turned clear and cold. Agatha walked home alone, her mind buzzing with half-formed connections. The diaries, "He will regret it," the muddy footprint, the whispers of lovers and grudges. At her gate, she paused, glancing back toward Honeysuckle Row. Lights glimmered behind lace curtains, the village serene once more. But beneath the calm, she sensed something still festering: resentment, envy, fear. She squared her shoulders. Claudia Trimble's death had been too neat, too polite, and Agatha Raisin had never trusted polite things. The rain had finally cleared, leaving behind a morning so bright it seemed to apologize for the previous gloom. Honeysuckle Row sparkled innocently in the sunshine, an effect that annoyed Agatha Raisin profoundly. Sunshine, she thought, was wasted on hypocrites and murderers. The Carsely and District Garden Club had convened an emergency meeting in the village hall, a squat building that smelt faintly of damp coats and sponge cake. Chairs scraped, kettles clanked, and the air was thick with indignation, disguised as grief. Agatha sat in the front row beside Mrs. Bloxby, who had brought a tin of home-baked shortbread as a peace offering to the committee. Agatha had brought only her handbag and a strong sense of suspicion. Tilly Granger was already sobbing noisily into a tissue, her blonde curls wilting under the strain. "She stole them," she wailed. "My prize petunias. I told everyone at the spring fair those were mine, and now I'll never get them back." "You could hardly ask her to return them now," murmured Agatha, earning a reproachful glance from Mrs. Bloxby. At the head table stood Peter Blake, tall, grey, and composed in a way that looked suspiciously rehearsed. "We must maintain dignity," he said. "Mrs. Trimble was a valued member of this community. Whatever her eccentricities, she gave much of her time to beautifying our village." "Beautifying?" sniffed Tilly. "She once told me my begonias looked common." "They do," muttered someone in the back. A ripple of laughter broke the tension. Agatha allowed herself a small smile. It was all so deliciously human: envy, rivalry, pride, and somewhere among it all, murder. "If we might proceed," said Harriet Pie, rising to her feet like a moral lighthouse. Her floral dress was aggressively cheerful, her voice sharp enough to prune hedges. "It is not for us to dwell on petty quarrels. We should pray. Evil has entered our midst, and only through spiritual cleansing will peace return." "Oh, for heaven's sake," said Agatha. "She wasn't possessed. She was bludgeoned." Gasps fluttered through the room. Mrs. Bloxby sighed quietly, the sigh of a woman accustomed to Agatha's diplomacy. Before Harriet could retort, the double doors flew open and a familiar voice rang out. "Aggie, darling, I've come to pay my respects to the deceased, or more accurately, to the drama she left behind." Roy Silver swept in, all London tan and tailored trousers, waving a glossy magazine like a flag. He kissed Agatha's cheek noisily. "Can you believe it? Murder in the Cotswolds. My editor practically fainted with joy. We're calling it The Deadly Dahlia, When Gardeners Go Bad." "Roy," said Agatha through clenched teeth, "this is not a publicity stunt." "Everything's a publicity stunt if you do it properly," he said cheerfully, settling himself on the edge of a chair. "Anyway, you're the local sleuth, aren't you? This could be your big comeback. Agatha Raisin, Murder Among the Marigolds." Agatha could feel the collective bristle of the villagers around her. In Carsely, ambition was tolerated only when paired with humility, and Agatha had long ago misplaced hers. "So," Roy continued blithely, Any juicy leads? I heard whispers about poison. Something in her tea, was it? Nothing's confirmed, said Agatha curtly. Oh, but the rumour's delightful, Roy grinned. Imagine, a drop of pesticide mistaken for sugar. Fatal irony, though rather bad for brand partnerships. Mrs. Bloxby coughed delicately. Mr. Silver, perhaps you could... Please call me Roy, he interrupted. And might I just say, vicars' wives make marvellous interviewees. All that quiet wisdom, very human interest. Agatha rolled her eyes. Roy, do sit down before someone fertilises you. At that moment, Bill Wong appeared in the doorway, looking resigned. His presence brought a murmur of restrained curiosity. Agatha brightened visibly. Murder was serious, but murder with Bill was at least competent. He gave her a nod before addressing the room. I'm here to assure everyone the police are conducting a thorough investigation. There's no need for speculation or panic. Speculation is all we have, said Tilly miserably. They'll say it was an accident next, won't they? Just like with old Mrs. Palmer's missing brooch. That was found in her dog's bed, said Bill patiently. Agatha seized her moment. Tell us, Bill, was it poison? Everyone's saying it was pesticide. Everyone, Bill said dryly, should stop reading crime fiction. Roy clapped his hands. Too late. Bill ignored him. We're still waiting for official toxicology. There were trace residues in her cup, but nothing unusual for someone who kept pesticides in the shed. It's being examined. So she was poisoned, said Tilly triumphantly. Not necessarily, said Bill. The doctor still suspects natural causes, or a fall. Agatha stood. A fall doesn't wipe a teacup clean. The room fell quiet. Even Roy stopped smiling. What do you mean? Asked Peter Blake, his tone clipped. Agatha turned to Bill. You said there were residues, but the cup was wiped. Someone wanted to remove prints or traces. Bill's eyes met hers, weary but acknowledging. The inside of the cup was unusually clean, he admitted. That's all I can say. Gasps rippled again. Harriet Pie crossed herself. Wickedness, she declared. This is what happens when people mock God's order and display gnomes. Agatha frowned. What do gnomes have to do with anything? Claudia Trimble, said Roy, delighted by the gossip, was apparently waging war with the council over her ornamental installations. My source tells me she imported 2 stone cherubs from Italy without permission. Absolute scandal. Imported ornaments? Said Agatha, intrigued. How thrillingly illegal. The council threatened fines, said Roy, lowering his voice theatrically. But some say there was more to it, that the ornaments weren't what they seemed. Contraband art, perhaps. Smuggled relics of love lost among the lupins. Do shut up, Roy, said Agatha. You're giving everyone ideas. But she was thinking fast. Illegal ornaments, quarrels with the council, a wiped teacup. These were not the acts of a woman dying quietly in her garden. Peter Blake rose again, his composure cracking slightly. This meeting is turning into a circus. If you'll excuse me, I have business. Yes, trimming your hedge of alibis, muttered Agatha under her breath. As the villagers began to disperse, Roy leaned toward her. Aggie, you're loving this. Don't be ridiculous. You are. Your eyes are sparkling with scandal. Admit it, you missed being the talk of the village. She hesitated. Perhaps a little. Well, he said, grinning. "Let's make sure you stay centre stage. My photographer's on his way." "Roy!" "Relax, I'll blur out the corpse." By the time the hall emptied, only Agatha, Bill, and Mrs. Bloxby remained. Mrs. Bloxby gathered the untouched shortbread, while Bill packed his notes. "You shouldn't have told them about the teacup," Agatha said quietly. "I didn't," he replied. "You did." "You confirmed it," he sighed. "You're impossible." "And you like me that way," she said, smiling. He gave a small, tired laugh. "Try not to interfere, Agatha. We'll call you if we need a consultant on the moral failings of garden committees." "You do that," she said sweetly. When they left the hall, the sun was low, turning the wet street to bronze. Agatha paused, watching the villagers drift away in twos and threes, their voices murmuring like bees around scandal. Somewhere down the lane, Harriet Pie was already promising prayer meetings, and Tilly was loudly accusing Peter Blake of theft. "You know," said Roy, falling into step beside her, "if I ever die in this village, promise you'll investigate. I'd hate to be left to amateurs." Agatha gave him a sideways glance. "I'd hate to have to," she said. They reached the corner where the honeysuckle still glistened with dew. Agatha stopped, her eyes narrowing. The archway, the garden, the immaculate fence. It all looked too perfect, as if perfection itself had been the weapon. "Poison or not," she murmured, "someone wiped that cup. Someone's cleaning up more than tea stains." Roy shivered theatrically. "You do make murder sound domestic." "It usually is," said Agatha, "and so are the killers." She turned toward home, her handbag swinging, the faint scent of honeysuckle following like a challenge. The Cotswold night had a peculiar stillness, the kind that made even crickets think twice about chirping. A faint mist coiled through the hedgerows, turning the lamps along Honeysuckle Row into smudges of gold. Agatha Raisin, wrapped in a scarf too glamorous for surveillance work, sat stiffly in Charles Fraith's low-slung sports car, glaring at the dashboard clock as though it personally offended her. "You realise," she said, "we've been sitting here for 2 hours. 2 hours, Charles, and not so much as a furtive twitch from a murderer. Even MI5 would have packed up and gone to the pub by now." Charles, reclining comfortably, with the air of a man born to idle in expensive machinery, offered her a sausage roll. "Nonsense. Stakeouts require patience. And condiments." "You're enjoying this far too much," she muttered, taking the roll anyway. "Honestly, if you spent half as much effort solving crimes as you do finding excuses to eat pastry, you'd still think I was lazy," he finished with a grin. Agatha turned to the window, pretending indifference. Claudia Trimble's cottage was barely visible across the narrow lane, its garden now eerily quiet. The arch of honeysuckle looked ghostly in the moonlight. Agatha had insisted they come here after hearing rumours of someone prowling around the garden at night. She wasn't sure what she expected. Perhaps the killer returning to gloat, or to remove evidence, but the waiting was unbearable. "We could have done this from my cottage," she said, "with central heating and proper chairs." "And missed the thrill of the chase? Never." She shot him a sidelong glance. "You're only here because you think danger makes me interesting." "It does," said Charles, smiling faintly. "But mostly, I'm here for the sausage rolls." Agatha snorted. Yet despite herself, she felt a small warmth at his easy charm. He was infuriatingly calm, where she buzzed with restless energy. Perhaps that was why they worked so oddly well together, when he wasn't getting on her nerves. Just as she was about to suggest calling it a night, movement flickered by the hedge. A figure, tall, deliberate, emerged from the shadows behind Claudia's cottage. The person carried a torch and something metallic that caught the light. Agatha gripped Charles's arm. "There! By the back gate!" Yes, I see him. Probably a fox." "That's a man, you idiot! Quick, start the car!" "And do what? Chase him round the rhododendrons?" But Agatha was already out, her boots sinking into the damp verge. "Come on!" she hissed, and strode across the lane, coat flapping like a determined crow. Charles followed, sighing theatrically. The figure turned at the sound and froze. Agatha caught the gleam of spectacles, the faint outline of a gardening jacket. "Mr. Blake!" she called sharply. "What on earth are you doing creeping about at midnight?" Peter Blake straightened, his expression flickering between guilt and irritation. In one hand he held a small torch, in the other a pair of shears. "Mrs. Raisin," he said coldly, "I might ask you the same question." "Investigating," she said. "Unlike you, I have a reason to be suspicious. Care to explain why you're pruning bushes in the dark?" "I'm not pruning. I'm looking for my cat." "With garden shears?" "Those aren't mine. I've only got the torch," he said, flushing slightly. "Looks like shears to me," said Charles helpfully. "You're trespassing," Blake snapped. "I could call the police." "Excellent idea," said Agatha. "Let's have Bill Wong down here and see what he thinks of your midnight horticulture." Blake's jaw tightened. "There's no need for melodrama. My cat Smudge often hides in this garden. Claudia used to let him in." "You expect me to believe that?" Agatha demanded. "Believe what you like," he said curtly. "Good night, Mrs. Raisin." He strode away, his shoes crunching on the gravel. Agatha watched him go, suspicion prickling. "He's hiding something," she muttered. "Probably embarrassment," said Charles, "being accosted by a woman in curlers at midnight." "I am not in curlers," said Agatha, indignantly adjusting her scarf. "And he's lying. No one looks for a cat with pruning shears." "Maybe it's a dangerous cat," murmured Charles. Agatha ignored him, marching back towards the car. Her mind was ticking fast. Peter Blake, the calm neighbour who'd lost a lawsuit to Claudia over a few inches of fence. She'd heard Bill mention it in passing, but dismissed it as village pettiness. Now it felt like motive dressed up as landscaping. "Boundary disputes," she muttered, sliding into her seat. "They start wars and end marriages. Why not murder?" Charles yawned. "Fascinating, darling, but can we go home before frostbite sets in?" "You go," she said. "I'm waiting another half hour." "Agatha, it's nearly midnight. Murderers don't clock out, Charles." He sighed but stayed. That, more than any charm, softened her irritation. By the time the church clock struck 12, the mist had thickened again, wrapping the lane in secrecy. Nothing else stirred. Finally, with a reluctant sigh, Agatha conceded defeat. "Fine," she said. "Let's go. But tomorrow I'm having a word with Bill." "Lovely," said Charles, starting the engine. "I'll tell him to bring handcuffs." "Only if he uses them on Blake," she replied tartly. The following morning found Agatha in Bill Wong's office, looking indignant and slightly under-caffeinated. "You were spying on Peter Blake," Bill said, rubbing his temples. "Observing," corrected Agatha. "He was skulking around Claudia's garden with a weapon. That's evidence." "It's trespassing," Bill replied. "On both your parts. "Oh, stop being such a constable," she said. "He's lying about something. You said he and Claudia had a lawsuit." Bill nodded reluctantly. "Boundary dispute. He lost. Cost him a small fortune. But that was 3 years ago." "You think grudges have an expiry date?" said Agatha. "Please. Some people can nurse resentment longer than a mortgage." Bill gave her a steady look. "I'm warning you, stay out of it. We're still collecting statements, and I don't want to arrest you for interfering again." "You'd never arrest me," she said confidently. "Don't tempt me," he murmured. Back at her cottage, Agatha found Mrs. Bloxby waiting on the doorstep, her expression mild but purposeful. "I hope I'm not intruding," said the vicar's wife. "Not unless you've come to scold me," said Agatha, ushering her in. Mrs. Bloxby smiled. "Only gently. I've discovered something curious at the church. You know Claudia used to make generous donations?" "Yes, though I always assumed it was to compensate for her personality." Mrs. Bloxby ignored the quip. Recently, she began sending envelopes marked for HP, large sums, every month. HP? Agatha frowned. "A person?" "I don't know. No one by those initials in the parish. Perhaps a charity? Or," she hesitated, "a blackmailer?" Agatha's pulse quickened. "Now that's interesting." Mrs. Bloxby looked regretful. "I wish it weren't. The envelope stopped the week before she died. Which means either she paid them off or they decided to collect personally," said Agatha. "Excellent work, Mrs. Bloxby." "It wasn't work, dear. It was tidying the accounts." "Same thing," said Agatha, already reaching for her notebook. That evening, Charles turned up unannounced with a bottle of wine and a grin. "I've brought sustenance for detectives," he said. "You mean distraction?" she replied, though she accepted the glass he poured her. "So," he said, settling on the sofa. "What's the latest from the trenches?" Agatha filled him in on the HP mystery. Charles considered it, swirling his wine. Could stand for anything. Harriet Pie, perhaps. She's pious enough to extort in the Lord's name. "Don't be ridiculous," said Agatha, though the idea lodged itself inconveniently in her mind. "And your midnight gardener?" "Still a liar," she said. "I'll bet anything those shears weren't for cats." "You do have a suspicious mind," said Charles fondly. "Someone has to," she replied. "The police are too busy telling me off." Outside, rain began again, soft against the window panes. Agatha felt the familiar thrill of a puzzle tightening, the pieces beginning to shift into place. There were too many threads, Blake's nocturnal trimming, the envelopes to HP, the wiped teacup. Somewhere they connected. Later, after Charles had gone and the house had fallen silent, Agatha went to lock the front door. Something on the mat caught her eye. A folded piece of paper, slightly damp from the rain. She picked it up, frowning. The note was written in block capitals, the letters uneven but deliberate. "Mind your own garden, or you'll be next." For a moment she simply stared, her heart thudding. Then she gave a small, defiant smile. "Well," she said aloud, "at least someone's noticed my investigative skills." Still, as she slid the bolt across the door, a faint unease lingered. The village had turned from quaint to quietly menacing, and Agatha Raisin, who prided herself on courage, felt for once the cold nip of fear beneath her bravado. Morning sunlight seeped into Agatha Raisin's cottage as if testing its welcome. She sat at her kitchen table, hair still in disarray, staring suspiciously at her teapot as though it might hold answers. The threatening note from the night before lay folded beside her plate of untouched toast. "Mind your own garden, or you'll be next," she read aloud again, the words still raising an involuntary shiver. She told herself it was nonsense, mere mischief. Yet she'd slept with the lights on, a fact she intended to take to her grave. Fritz the cat regarded her gravely from the chair opposite, tail tucked neatly around his paws. "Oh, don't look at me like that," she said. "You'd have hidden under the sofa yourself." By 10 o'clock, Agatha had transformed her fear into fury. No anonymous coward would intimidate her. She would find out who sent the note and who killed Claudia Trimble, even if she had to interview every liar in Carsely. Her first stop was Tilly Granger's flower shop, petals and posies, a cheerful jumble of blooms that smelt overwhelmingly of lilies and ambition. Tilly herself was behind the counter, trimming stems with anxious precision. "Agatha, how are you holding up, dear?" she said brightly. "Terrible business about Mrs. Trimble. I couldn't sleep a wink for thinking of it." "You and half the village," said Agatha, eyeing her. "I thought I'd ask you something. Purely routine, of course." "Of course," said Tilly, visibly delighted. "You think it was murder, don't you?" "Let's just say I'm keeping an open mind." Agatha leaned on the counter, lowering her voice. "I happened to hear that you ordered some rare fertilizer recently, under Claudia's name." Tilly's pruning shears froze mid-air. "Who told you that?" "I have my sources." "Oh, honestly," Tilly said, flustered. "It wasn't anything dodgy. She asked me to buy it for her, said she didn't want her name linked to it because of the council. Something about import regulations." "Import regulations," Agatha repeated sceptically. "Yes, she said it was an experimental blend, organic but strong. I didn't even open the bag. I gave her the invoice and she paid cash." "And where is this miracle fertilizer now?" "Gone. She collected it a week before. Agatha tapped the counter thoughtfully. "Strange. I'd have thought a woman like Claudia would want her name on everything she owned." "She did say it was for a special project," Tilly added quickly. "Some secret thing she was planning, something about renewal and purity." "Renewal and purity," said Agatha dryly. "Sounds more like a shampoo advert than a gardening experiment." Tilly gave a weak laugh. "I swear that's all I know. I'm not mixed up in anything." Agatha believed her, mostly. Tilly was too fluttery for deception. Her lies would collapse under their own nervous weight. Still, it was another loose thread. Fertilizer, secrecy, and Claudia's odd notion of purity. Outside, the morning had warmed pleasantly, the air humming with bees. Carsely, with its postcard perfection, looked as innocent as a nursery rhyme. Yet Agatha knew better. Behind every lace curtain lay curiosity, and behind that, malice. Her mobile rang, the ringtone an unholy clash of jazz and static. Roy Silver's voice burst through. "Aggie, I've got gossip, and you owe me lunch for it." "If it's about my love life, keep it," she said. "Worse, it's about the dearly departed Mrs. Trimble. You know that charitable trust she was always boasting about? Turns out it doesn't exist." Agatha stopped walking. "What do you mean, doesn't exist?" "Apparently, her late husband's will left everything to a charity she was meant to establish. The Trimble Foundation for Civic Beautification. Lovely name, pity she never registered it. The funds vanished into thin air. Poof! And you're sure of this?" "My editor's cousin works in Cheltenham Council's records office. There's no sign of any foundation. Someone pocketed that money." "Someone with moral pretensions and a good manicure," said Agatha grimly. "Exactly," Roy said, sounding pleased. Oh, and if you could use my name in your next local exposé, make sure to spell it right. Silver with flair, not silence. Agatha hung up, her mind racing. Stolen charity money, secret fertilizer, midnight gardeners. It was all turning into the compost heap of the century. She found Bill Wong later that afternoon in the police station's break room, nursing a mug of tea that looked more despairing than strong. "You again," he said mildly. "Don't tell me you've solved it." "Nearly," said Agatha, dropping into the chair opposite. "Did you know Claudia's supposed charity never existed?" Bill blinked. "Where did you hear that?" "A reputable source," she said, meaning Roy, which was stretching reputable beyond its natural limits. He sighed. "We're aware. We traced one of the old donation accounts. It leads to a Mrs. Harriet Pie." "Harriet?" Agatha sat upright. "Miss Prayer will heal all pie. That woman's idea of generosity is lending you a hymn book." "Nevertheless," said Bill, "the funds went to an account in her name. We're checking whether it's fraud or something more innocent." "Innocent," said Agatha, "is not a word I'd use for Harriet Pie. Come on, Bill, let me have a go at her." "Absolutely not," he said. "Fine," she said, standing. "I'll just drop in for a spiritual consultation." Bill groaned. Agatha, but she was already out the door. Harriet Pie lived in a prim stone cottage with curtains so stiff they might have been starched by angels. When Agatha and Charles arrived, Charles having invited himself for moral support and entertainment, Harriet opened the door in an apron decorated with Bible verses. "Mrs. Raisin," she said warily, "and Mr. Fraith. How unexpected." "We won't take much of your time," Agatha said sweetly. "Just a few questions about Claudia Trimble." Harriet pursed her lips. "A tragic loss to our community." "Indeed, especially her charitable work," said Agatha. A faint flush coloured Harriet's cheeks. "Ah, yes, I assisted her in those matters." "So we understand," said Charles smoothly. "You must tell us how the money was managed. Agatha's fascinated by administrative virtue." Harriet hesitated, then gestured them inside. The sitting room was immaculate, smelling faintly of lavender and sanctimony. "I simply handled the donations," she said. "Claudia wished to remain anonymous in her giving. She feared envy." "A rare fear in her case," murmured Agatha. "The funds were for a moral mission," Harriet went on. "Claudia believed beauty was God's reflection. She wanted to cleanse the village of vulgarity, plastic lawn ornaments, tasteless decor, that dreadful neon sign at the pub." "How very noble," said Charles. "And did she intend to cleanse our bank accounts as well?" Harriet stiffened. "Every penny went to a cause she believed righteous." "Which happens to be your account," said Agatha. Harriet's eyes filled suddenly with tears. "She trusted me. She said the world mocked virtue, that I must safeguard the mission. I only kept the funds safe until her plans were ready." "Safe?" said Agatha. "For how long?" "As long as necessary," Harriet whispered. "She said she'd tell me when the time came." Agatha exchanged a glance with Charles. There was sincerity in Harriet's distress, but also something evasive, almost theatrical. "Did she ever mention anyone called H.P.?" Agatha asked. "H.P.?" Harriet blinked rapidly. "Why, that's me, Harriet Pie." "Of course it is," Agatha said slowly, remembering the initials on Claudia's church envelopes. "She said God had chosen me," Harriet went on, "that I was her instrument. I never questioned her generosity." "But you didn't refuse it either," Charles murmured. Harriet burst into noisy tears. "You people don't understand. Claudia was a visionary." Agatha rose, unimpressed. Visionary or not, someone turned her visions into cash. I'll find out who. Please go, Harriet said faintly, dabbing her eyes. Outside, Charles exhaled. Good heavens, Aggie, I thought she was going to start speaking in tongues. She's hiding something, said Agatha. Maybe not guilt, but knowledge. Or drama, said Charles. Hard to tell the difference in the devout. Agatha gave a short laugh. Still, it explains the envelopes. H.P. Harriet Pie. Claudia was funding her little crusade. But for what purpose? Salvation, apparently, Charles said. Though from what? She never specified. They paused at the church gate, where the late afternoon sun slanted through the yews. Charles stooped suddenly and picked up a small envelope from the gravel path, cream-coloured with delicate initials embossed in gold. C.T. Well, well, he said, slipping it into his pocket. A leftover from our benefactress. Hand it over, said Agatha. Later, said Charles with a grin. It might be useful evidence, or a love letter from beyond the grave. Don't be ridiculous, she said, but curiosity sparked in her eyes. He held the envelope briefly to his nose. Smells of honeysuckle. Everything in this village smells of honeysuckle, said Agatha, though the scent lingered on her mind as they walked away, sweet, deceptive, impossible to ignore. The morning rain had given way to a soft drizzle, the kind that felt less like weather and more like a quiet rebuke. Agatha Raisin stood at the edge of Honeysuckle Row, eyeing Claudia Trimble's shuttered cottage as though it had personally insulted her. We shouldn't be here, muttered Charles Fraith, his tone halfway between warning and amusement. Nonsense, said Agatha briskly. If the police can blunder about looking for clues, so can I. Besides, Bill won't miss what he doesn't see. You mean he'll miss you breaking into a murder victim's cellar? Exactly, said Agatha. That's where you come in. I need a distraction. Charles raised an eyebrow. You're asking me to flirt with a constable? If you must put it that way, yes. He sighed with theatrical despair. Aggie, one day this is going to get us both arrested, or worse, written up in the Times under local oddities. But when she looked at him expectantly, he relented, straightening his jacket. Fine. I'll charm the law while you commit a minor felony. We all have our gifts. Agatha grinned. Good man. I'll owe you one. You already do, he said, and sauntered off toward the constable posted near the gate, his voice carrying easily in the damp air. Agatha waited until they were out of sight before slipping round the back. The garden was still immaculate, despite its owner being dead, a testament to Claudia's obsession with order. Agatha found the cellar door under the ivy, locked but old. She pulled a small screwdriver from her handbag. You'd think people in murder mysteries would invest in better locks, she muttered, jiggling the latch. It gave with a satisfying click. The cellar smelled of damp stone and secrets. Agatha switched on her torch, the beam slicing through the gloom. Rows of dusty wine bottles lined one wall. Garden tools and crates filled the others. She half expected Claudia's ghost to rise and scold her for smudging a surface. At first, there was nothing of note, just the detritus of a well-ordered life. Then her torchlight caught a metal glint on a high shelf. She reached up, tugging down a tin box flecked with rust. Inside, wrapped in yellowing paper, were photographs. Dozens of them. Agatha crouched, flipping through them one by one. Most showed Claudia younger, smiling stiffly at garden shows or committees. But then, her pulse quickened. She found one of Claudia with another woman. Dark-haired, lively-eyed, and unmistakably affectionate. The back read, in neat ink, with Dear Margaret at Bourton Fair. Agatha frowned. Margaret Blake. Peter Blake's late wife. The very same woman who'd died years before in what the village had called tragic circumstances. So Claudia and Margaret had been friends. That changed everything. She found another photo, older still. The two women arm in arm outside Claudia's cottage, laughing as if sharing some private joke. Claudia looked warmer, less severe. And in one, Agatha noticed Peter Blake himself in the background, expression unreadable. "Well, well," she murmured. The plot thickens, and so does the compost. She was sliding the photographs back when she heard footsteps above. Heavy, deliberate. Not Charles. "Oh, damn," she whispered. She stuffed the box under her coat and flicked off the torch. The footsteps came closer, the sound of the front door opening, then closing. A voice. "Mrs. Raisin, I know you're in there." Bill Wong. Agatha groaned inwardly. Of course. When she emerged blinking into daylight, Bill was waiting in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. Behind him stood a red-faced constable looking sheepish and guilty. Charles hovered beside them, hands raised in mock innocence. "I told her you'd never get away with it," said Charles, "but she insisted. Heroic determination, really." "You call that helping?" snapped Agatha. Bill's expression was unimpressed. "Care to explain why you broke into a crime scene?" "Because you're too cautious," she said. "You've got half the force guarding a cottage when the real clues are inside it." "And what did you find?" Agatha hesitated, then handed him the tin box. "Photographs, Claudia and Peter Blake's wife. They knew each other." Bill flipped through them, his frown deepening. "This could change things. I'll say, it means Peter lied. He told everyone he barely knew Claudia. What if his wife found out they were friends? Or more?" "Let's not jump to conclusions," said Bill. "You're always saying that," said Agatha. "One of these days, you'll miss the right conclusion entirely." "And one of these days," he retorted, "you'll end up explaining your methods to a magistrate." Charles intervened smoothly. Now, Bill, she only wanted to help, and surely these pictures are worth a slap on the wrist." Bill sighed. "You're both incorrigible. But yes, this is useful. If Blake lied about knowing Claudia, I need to know why." "You think it was jealousy?" asked Agatha. "Or guilt," said Bill. "Maybe his wife's death wasn't as tidy as it seemed." "So you do think it's connected?" Agatha said triumphantly. "I didn't say that," Bill replied, but his tone betrayed uncertainty. "Now, go home, and stay out of trouble for once." "Fine," said Agatha. "But if you find a body in the wine cellar next, don't say I didn't warn you." That evening, the rain returned with soft insistence, tapping against Agatha's window like a polite detective asking for entry. She sat by the fire, the day's discoveries replaying in her mind. Mrs. Bloxby sat opposite, hands folded neatly around a mug of cocoa. "You know, Agatha, sometimes I wonder whether you pursue these cases because you care about justice, or because you hate being left out of the story." Agatha bristled. "That's unfair. I care deeply about justice. And perhaps a little about being right?" "Well," said Agatha after a pause, "it's not as if the two are mutually exclusive." Mrs. Bloxby smiled. "Still, you risk a great deal for someone you never liked." Agatha looked into the fire. Claudia was insufferable, but she didn't deserve that. No one does. "Envy and grief," said Mrs. Bloxby softly, "can take root like ivy. Once they've wound themselves round the heart, they choke everything else." Agatha sighed. "I suppose you're right, but I can't help thinking there was more to Claudia than the porcelain smile and pastel gloves. Those photos. She actually looked happy, human. Perhaps friendship brought out her better side, said Mrs. Bloxby. Or her worse, said Agatha. Depends on what she did to keep it. They sat in companionable silence for a while. The rain grew heavier and the fire popped. It was one of those evenings when Carsely felt too small for all its secrets. Promise me you'll be careful, said Mrs. Bloxby at last. Oh, I'm always careful, said Agatha. You're not, said Mrs. Bloxby with gentle certainty. Agatha smiled ruefully. Fine, I'll be slightly less reckless. When Mrs. Bloxby had gone, Agatha tidied the mugs and went upstairs. Her coat, still draped over the chair, smelled faintly of damp and honeysuckle. Odd, she thought. She hadn't worn it near the garden today. She lifted it to her nose. The scent was distinct, sweet, lingering. Her heart gave a small, startled leap. No, she murmured. Surely not. The front door was locked, the windows secure, yet the perfume clung unmistakably, delicate and intrusive, as though someone had brushed past her things. For a long moment she stood perfectly still, listening to the house. The only sound was the rain. Then Fritz padded softly into the room, tail flicking, eyes alert. He stared toward the landing, ears twitching. What is it? She whispered. A floorboard creaked, just once. Agatha's bravado returned in a rush. She grabbed the nearest weapon, a rolled-up country living magazine, and marched to the landing. Nothing. The hallway lay empty, the shadows quiet. Still, as she went back to her room, she locked the door behind her. Mind your own garden, she muttered, glancing at the note on her bedside table. Well, someone certainly isn't. The rain eased into a hush, but the scent of honeysuckle lingered, delicate and defiant, like a warning, or perhaps a promise. The morning of the garden gala arrived with deceptive serenity. A pale blue sky stretched over Carsely, birds chattering cheerfully as though they hadn't the faintest idea there was a murderer at large. Agatha Raisin, however, had no such luxury. She stood before her mirror in mortal combat with a hat borrowed from Mrs. Bloxby, an airy confection of lilac straw and netting that made her look, she thought darkly, like a well-dressed mushroom. You look charming, Mrs. Bloxby had said kindly. I look ridiculous, Agatha muttered now, stabbing a hairpin into submission. But it'll have to do. Nothing like a good hat to disguise intent. Her plan was simple, or so she told herself. The Spring Garden Gala would go on as scheduled, in honour of dear Claudia. It would lure out the killer, or at least shake loose the village's remaining pretences. Everyone had secrets. All Agatha needed was to catch the right one slipping. When she arrived at the village hall, the place was a tableau of rural aspiration. Tables gleamed with home-baked cakes, floral arrangements were poised for judgment, and the air smelled of pollen and ambition. Roy Silver, resplendent in a linen jacket and sunglasses entirely unsuited to the weather, was already circulating with a notebook. Aggie, darling, you look divine, like Audrey Hepburn on a garden leave. You mean leave from the garden, said Agatha. Put that pen down. You're not turning this into another one of your when villages attack features. Nonsense, it's culture. Besides, the readers adore moral rot under pastoral charm. Then you'll fit right in, she said. But her lips twitched despite herself. Bill Wong was less conspicuous, lurking near a row of potted palms with the wary posture of a man attending a social event under duress. You know, he murmured when Agatha approached, I could arrest half the attendees for parking violations and save us all the trouble." "No, no," said Agatha, lowering her voice. "We're watching. Someone's bound to slip up today. Guilt never takes a holiday." "Neither do you," said Bill. Charles Fraith arrived late, of course, wearing a light suit and the expression of a man who had spent the morning being admired by his mirror. "Aggie, you outshine the entire hall," he declared, kissing her cheek. "Though that hat's a crime scene in itself." "You're lucky you're handsome," she said. "Otherwise I'd brain you with it." The festivities began with a brief speech from the parish council chair, whose words about community spirit and horticultural legacy evaporated into the chatter. The Prosecco flowed, cheap but enthusiastic, and the air buzzed with speculation, disguised as condolence. "She had enemies, of course," whispered one villager near the jam display. "Oh, everyone did," replied another. "That's what made her interesting." Agatha glided from group to group, smiling, nodding, listening. She was both hostess and hunter, scanning faces for nerves or calculation. Peter Blake was there, standing apart by the raffle table, impeccably dressed but pale. Harriet Pie hovered nearby, haloed in self-righteous grief. "Ladies and gentlemen," Peter called suddenly, raising his glass, "a toast to Mrs. Claudia Trimble. She believed in beauty, order, and standards. Let us keep them alive in her memory." There was an awkward murmur of assent. Roy, who had clearly decided the Prosecco was worth the trip, leaned toward Agatha. "If I didn't know better, I'd say he was auditioning for sainthood." But then Harriet Pie gave a soft gasp and crumpled theatrically to the floor. "Good grief," said Agatha, setting down her glass. "What now?" A chorus of concern erupted. "Fetch water." "Call the vicar." "She's fainted." Bill moved swiftly, kneeling beside the fallen Harriet. "She's all right," he said after a moment. "Just shock, or too much sherry in the trifle." "No one could blame her," murmured Charles. "The speeches are enough to fell a stronger constitution." As Harriet was revived with fuss and smelling salts, Agatha caught something peculiar. Peter Blake, in the confusion, bent briefly toward Harriet's handbag, just a flicker of movement, but slipped something inside. "Got you," Agatha murmured. When the excitement subsided and Harriet was carried off for rest, Agatha found her moment. She intercepted Peter near the terrace, his expression cool, detached. "Lovely speech," she said. He gave her a thin smile. "One must say the right things at such times." "And do the right things?" she asked lightly. "Meaning?" "Meaning I saw you put something in Harriet Pie's bag. Care to explain?" For a moment his poise faltered. Then he sighed, producing the object from his pocket instead. A faded photograph, the edges curling. "Ah, I see. I thought better of it at the last moment. It's nothing sinister, Mrs. Raisin. Just an old memory." Agatha took the photograph. It showed Claudia's late husband, Richard Trimble, laughing beside Peter at what looked like a summer fete. Claudia herself was nowhere in sight. "You were friends?" Agatha asked. "Once," he said, "before Richard's death." "And Claudia?" He hesitated. "Claudia tolerated me." "Tolerated?" "She couldn't forgive that I cared more for Richard's memory than for her sympathy. He was a better man than she ever understood." "You loved him," Agatha said quietly. A small, weary smile. "Not in the way you mean, but yes, perhaps I did. He was kind, and kind people are rare in this world. When he died, I blamed her. When she died, I suppose I blamed myself. So you did quarrel with her? Often, but I never wished her dead. Agatha studied him. His voice held sadness, not guilt, yet grief could twist itself into strange shapes. Then why the photograph? I found it among her things years ago. She must have kept it, though she denied caring for him after his death. I thought Harriet might understand, in her way. She always admired Claudia's moral fortitude. I thought it might comfort her to know the woman was merely human. Agatha arched an eyebrow. Comfort through gossip. You've missed your calling, Mr. Blake. You'd make a splendid village matron. He gave a faint, humourless laugh. Perhaps I already am one. As he turned away, Bill appeared from the crowd, expression grim. Everything all right? Depends what you mean by right, said Agatha. Peter's just confessed to emotional complexity, not murder. Bill sighed. I'll add it to the file under useless but poetic. Try not to antagonise him, Agatha. You always say that. And you never listen. That's what keeps us both employed, she said sweetly, and swept off toward the refreshment table. Roy intercepted her halfway, waving a half-empty glass. Aggie, darling, the scandal's dying down. We need a fresh headline. Can't you accuse someone before tea? If I did, it'd be you, she said. Oh, flattering, he grinned. But seriously, what's your gut say? That everyone's lying, she said. But the lies don't match. The raffle was called. Applause followed, thin and dutiful. The afternoon sun tilted lower, gilding the church spire. As people drifted homeward, Carsely seemed to exhale relief, its duty to decorum done for another day. Later, Agatha and Charles walked back toward the cottage through lanes glowing with evening light. Well, Charles asked, did your grand social experiment yield anything? A fainting fit, a confession of misplaced affection, and indigestion, she said. Not bad for one day. And the murderer? Still hiding, but I can feel them close. Or perhaps you're addicted to suspicion, he said lightly. You'd suspect a dandelion of malice if it grew too fast. If I did, I'd probably be right, said Agatha. They reached her gate, pausing under the honeysuckle that now hung limp in the fading light. Agatha turned to Charles. Tell me, do you believe Peter Blake? Yes, said Charles, but belief isn't evidence, and you've never let either stop you. She smiled faintly. No, I suppose not. He touched the brim of his hat. Well then, detective, I'll leave you to your musings. Try not to burgle anyone tonight. Good night, Charles. When he'd gone, Agatha entered her cottage, kicking off her shoes with relief. The day's triumphs and confusions blurred together in her mind. She poured herself a small gin, the tonic fizzing companionably, and sat by the window. Her hat lay on the table, absurd and triumphant. You did well, she told it. You may live to see another case. She was about to switch off the light when something caught her eye. On the windowsill, a smudge of brown, soil, not the dry indoor kind, but fresh, clinging, as if from a hand. She leaned closer. The mark was small, deliberate. Harriet Pie's hands, she thought suddenly, glimpsed this afternoon, the nails rimmed with earth, though no one had been gardening. The faintest tremor of unease ran through her. The village was smiling again, but the ground beneath its tidy lawns was still shifting. Agatha looked out into the darkening garden, where the honeysuckle stirred faintly in the breeze, its scent sweet and heavy. "You're not finished yet, are you?" she murmured. The wind answered with a whisper through the leaves, soft, almost conspiratorial. Agatha took a long sip of her drink, squared her shoulders, and reached for her notebook. "All right," she said aloud. "Let's dig." Dawn came shyly over Carsely, tinting the mist with a pale, uncertain gold. The village was still asleep, except for one cottage on Lilac Lane where Agatha Raisin was already dressed, scowling at her reflection in the mirror. No woman, she thought darkly, should have to look respectable at 5 a.m, especially when her purpose was skulking about in churchyards. She pulled on her wax jacket, tied a scarf that refused to sit neatly, and muttered, "I must be mad." "You said that 3 times already," said Bill Wong from the doorway, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "Then I'm consistent," she retorted, snatching one. "If I'm to tramp through mud with you, I'll need caffeine and divine protection." "Mrs. Bloxby's thermos counts as both," said Bill. "She brewed it herself. Said you'd need fortifying." Agatha took a sip and grimaced. Bless her heart, but I think she used holy water. They crossed the sleeping village in silence, breath misting in the cool air. The church loomed ahead, its tower blurred by fog. Birds were beginning to stir, hesitant chirps breaking the hush. Bill had received an anonymous tip, one of those convenient miracles that always seemed to happen after Agatha stirred up trouble. Harriet Pie, the pious gossip with suspiciously earth-rimmed fingernails the day before, was said to be visiting the churchyard to make things right. "She's not the type to rise early unless the vicar's offering indulgences," murmured Agatha. "Or absolution," said Bill. "We'll see which it is." They turned the corner of the vestry, boots sinking into the soft ground. A faint scrape reached them through the mist, metal against earth. Agatha's eyes gleamed. "Got her!" Peering around the hedgerow, they saw Harriet Pie in a long beige coat, bent over a patch of disturbed soil. She worked feverishly, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds, her breath steaming in the dawn air. Agatha stepped forward, voice crisp. "Digging for salvation, Harriet?" Harriet gave a shriek and dropped the spade. "Oh, Mrs. Raisin, I was just tending the flower bed." "At 5 a.m, said Bill, emerging beside Agatha. "Behind the vestry, where no flowers grow." Harriet's mouth opened and shut. "It's not what it looks like." "Then you won't mind explaining," said Agatha. Harriet clasped her hands in prayer-like panic. "I was only retrieving something that shouldn't have been buried." "How very biblical," said Agatha dryly. "Mind if we help?" Bill took the spade and dug where Harriet had been working. The soil was loose. Within minutes he hit something solid. A small metal casket emerged, scuffed and damp. Harriet gasped. "Please don't." Bill ignored her and prized it open. Inside were neatly bundled notes, cash, several £1,000s worth, and, folded beside them, a pair of garden gloves, pale pink once, but now smeared with brownish stains. Agatha leaned closer. Claudia Trimble's gloves. The colour drained from Harriet's face. "No, I didn't. Those weren't. She told me to hide it." "Who did?" said Bill sharply. "Claudia. She came to me weeks ago, said she needed help. She said Peter Blake had wronged her, cheated her, forged something, and she wanted me to keep the money safe until she put things right. I swear I thought it was just restitution." "Blackmail," said Agatha softly. Harriet flinched. "I didn't know. Not truly. I told myself it was charity, Claudia's moral mission. She made me promise to bury it here, said the church was safest. I never questioned her. I only wanted to do good. Good rarely involves spades, Agatha said. And those gloves? Harriet stared at them, horrified. She must have tucked them under the cash from the start. I never noticed them when I buried the box. I swear I didn't know they were in there. Bill straightened, expression unreadable. You realise this ties you directly to the crime scene. But I didn't kill her, Harriet wailed. I was terrified when she died. I thought someone might come after me for the money. I only wanted to put it back before anyone found out. You mean before we found out, said Agatha. Harriet's lip trembled. Yes. The church clock began to chime 6, the sound echoing through the fog. Agatha folded her arms, studying Harriet. For all her self-righteousness, the woman looked pitiful, mud on her coat, tears streaking her face. Righteousness wilted like an over-watered lily. You're a coward, Harriet, Agatha said quietly, but not a killer. Bill shot her a look. We can't rule her out. Oh, come off it, Agatha said. She'd faint halfway through a homicide. People surprise you, said Bill. So do motives. True, said Agatha. But guilt smells different from fear. Harriet reeks of the latter. Harriet whimpered softly. Please, I told you everything. Claudia said Peter Blake forged his wife's will years ago to keep the property. She found proof, threatened to expose him unless he paid back what he'd stolen. I don't know how much, only that she wanted justice. She said she'd use the money for the village. She made it sound noble. Agatha exchanged a glance with Bill. And you believed her? I wanted to, said Harriet. She could be cruel, but she had conviction. She said it was her duty to cleanse wrongdoing. And instead, she ended up dead under her own honeysuckle, said Agatha. Life's little ironies. A sound interrupted them, the distant rumble of an engine. Headlights cut through the mist, passing along the nearby lane. The driver slowed, curious, and rolled down his window. Everything all right, officer? He called. Bill flashed his badge automatically. Police business, sir. Just routine. The man nodded, then frowned. Strange business, that death. I drive through here every night, about 10:30. Saw someone near the Trimble cottage that evening. Thought nothing of it till I heard the news. Agatha moved closer. Someone. Who? Couldn't see the face. Big fella, though. Tall, broad shoulders. Had a cap pulled down. Went through the gate to her garden. You're sure it was a man? Asked Bill. Positive. Moving like he owned the place. She was still alive then, wasn't she? Yes, said Agatha. The driver shook his head. World's gone mad. Anyway, good luck catching him. He drove off, leaving the smell of diesel and a fresh gust of suspicion. Agatha turned to Bill triumphantly. There, you see? Harriet might be guilty of idiocy, but not murder. Our killer's male, and bold enough to visit the scene before midnight. Could still be a coincidence, said Bill. Plenty of men fit that description. Not in Carsely, said Agatha. Here, tall men are as rare as honesty at a parish meeting. Bill sighed. You do realise none of this changes the fact that Harriet concealed evidence. I realise you're itching to make an arrest to appease your superiors, she said, but it's too neat, too soon. You always think you know better, said Bill, not unkindly. Because I usually do, she said. He gave her a long look, then said, I'll take her in for questioning, and you, go home. Try not to interrogate anyone else until I've filed the report. No promises, said Agatha. Harriet, pale and trembling, was led toward Bill's car. She turned once, eyes desperate. "Please believe me, Mrs. Raisin. I only wanted to do right." Agatha watched them go, arms folded. The churchyard fell silent again, save for the drip of rain from the eaves and the distant call of a rook. She looked at the hole in the ground, the empty space where greed and guilt had shared a burial. "Do right," she murmured. "Everyone in this village thinks they're the hero of their own morality play." And then the curtain falls, and they're left holding the spade. She knelt briefly, brushing her fingers over the damp earth. Somewhere beneath the surface lay the truth, tangled with roots and lies. Later that morning, after a change of clothes and a fortifying breakfast, Agatha sat in her office, surrounded by papers, photographs, and one persistent headache. Charles dropped by uninvited, carrying croissants and charm in equal measure. "You look positively criminal," he said cheerfully. "If I am, you're my accomplice," she replied, taking the pastry anyway. Harriet Pie's been hauled in, Bill's sharpening his sense of justice, and the village thinks the case is solved, which means it isn't. Charles sank into the chair opposite. Why ever not? She had motive, access, and bad taste in outerwear. Perfect suspect. "Because it's too easy," said Agatha. "Harriet wouldn't swat a fly without filing for divine permission first. Besides, we've got a tall man seen entering Claudia's gate." "You think it was Blake?" "Who else fits? He had something to lose. His reputation, his secrets. Claudia had proof of that forged will. She was blackmailing him. Then why plant evidence with Harriet? Maybe he didn't. Maybe Claudia did. Or someone wanted us to think she did." "You do realise this is how madness begins," said Charles. "Oh, I passed madness ages ago," said Agatha briskly. "Now I'm on to enlightenment." Charles chuckled. "Then enlighten me. What's next?" "We talk to Peter Blake again, only this time we don't let him charm his way out of it." "We?" "Of course, we. I need someone who can smile disarmingly while I ask awkward questions." "So you mean I'm bait?" "Precisely," said Agatha. He grinned. "You really do know how to make a man feel useful." She ignored the flutter that came uninvited and said, "Be ready tonight. I have a feeling our tall man's story will start to crumble, along with his alibi." Charles raised his croissant in salute. "To adventure, then." "To catching a killer," she corrected. As he left, Agatha looked again at the photograph of Claudia with Margaret Blake, the laughter frozen in time. So many facades, she thought. Love disguised as loyalty, piety as greed, justice as vanity. The rain began again outside, tapping gently against the window panes. She took another sip of Mrs. Bloxby's coffee, lukewarm now, but steadying. "Too neat, too soon," she murmured, "and life's never neat in Carsely." The mist thickened over the fields beyond, as though the Cotswolds themselves were holding their breath. Somewhere out there, among the hedgerows and secrets, a tall man still walked free. The afternoon lay heavy with the promise of rain, a sulky sky pressing low over Carsely's cottages. Agatha Raisin sat at her kitchen table, arms folded, frown fierce enough to curdle milk. The kettle whistled unnoticed as she stared at the evidence spread before her, photographs, notes, and a small scrap of paper on which she'd scrawled "Honeysuckle." The scent had haunted her for days, drifting from her coat, clinging to the air like guilt. Honeysuckle, Claudia Trimble's perfume, an exclusive blend from a French atelier that she'd boasted about endlessly. And yet Agatha had smelled it again, recently, faint but distinct, when Peter Blake brushed past her at the gala. "You're staring at that like it's a crossword," came Charles Fraith's voice from the doorway. "Only less fun and more dangerous." Agatha ignored him. "It's the perfume," she said. "Everything comes back to that blasted perfume." Charles sighed and poured himself coffee. "You're certain it wasn't Harriet Pie's hairspray?" "I'd recognise the difference," she snapped. "Besides, Harriet couldn't tell Chanel from chicken feed. No, this was the same scent Claudia wore, and it's the key." "You mean to murder?" "I mean to Peter Blake," said Agatha. She jabbed a finger at her notes. "The gloves, the teacup, the midnight gardening, they all point to him. And that perfume ties the bow." "You're leaping again, darling. Dangerous sport at your age." "Mock all you like," she said, rising. "But I intend to prove it. I'm going to pay Mr. Blake a little visit." "You're not, seriously?" "I am, and you're coming with me." Charles looked pained. "Can't I just send flowers? Or better, a solicitor?" But she was already at the door, grabbing her Mac. Peter Blake's cottage sat at the edge of the village, neat as a sermon. His greenhouse, visible from the road, glowed faintly in the dim light. A humid jewel box of order. Agatha marched up the path with the confidence of one who'd long ago mistaken recklessness for bravery. Blake opened the door at her knock, looking weary but composed. "Mrs. Raisin," he said flatly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "A truce," said Agatha, flashing a smile she didn't mean. "You've had a rough time. I thought perhaps we might clear the air." "The air is fine," he said, but stepped aside. "Come in, if you must." Charles followed, hands in pockets, expression benign. "Lovely orchids, old man. You could charge admission." "They're temperamental," Blake said. "They require patience and precision." "So do women," murmured Charles, earning himself a glare from Agatha. "You'll forgive the intrusion," she said smoothly, "but I couldn't stop thinking about Claudia. It seems such a waste. A woman so admired, gone so suddenly." "Admired?" said Blake with a bitter smile. "Not universally, I think." "Perhaps not," Agatha conceded. "Still, she had presence and taste." She drifted to the greenhouse door, drawn by the gleam of glass. Inside, rows of flowering plants shimmered under the damp heat. The air was thick with scent, earthy, sweet, and something else beneath it, a faint trace of honeysuckle. Her pulse quickened. "You keep it immaculate," she said, her voice casual. "Did Claudia ever see this place?" Blake hesitated. "Once or twice. She was fond of plants." "And perfumes," Agatha added lightly. "That blend she wore, what was it called?" "Larmes du Soleil, wasn't it?" He blinked. "I'm surprised you remember." "Hard to forget," said Agatha. "It's rare and expensive. Funny thing, though, I caught the same scent at the gala, and again just now. I'd almost think it lingered here." Blake stiffened. "Perhaps you're imagining it." "Perhaps. Or perhaps you had a bottle of it once." "I told you." "You didn't tell me anything," said Agatha, her tone sharpening. "But I'll tell you something. Claudia bought that perfume directly from Paris. She used to brag that it was her signature, made to order. Only one other bottle was ever shipped to England in your wife's name." His colour drained. Agatha pressed on. "She wore it before she died. Claudia took it after. And now it's here again. You made the mistake of giving the same scent to 2 women, Mr. Blake. and both ended up dead. For a long moment he said nothing. The only sound was the steady drip of condensation in the greenhouse. Then he exhaled, a low, defeated sigh. "You think you're clever," he said quietly, "but it wasn't murder. It was a moment, an accident." Agatha folded her arms. "Go on." That night I went to Claudia's cottage. She'd demanded more money and told me to bring it there. We argued under the honeysuckle arch. She said she'd ruin me. I grabbed her arm to stop her walking off. She slipped on the wet path and went down, hitting the stone edging. It was over in a moment. I panicked. I wiped the teacup she'd been using and tried to make it look like a fall in the garden. "But you left traces," said Agatha. "The perfume, the gloves, the dirt on your shoes. You even went back to trim the hedge. Clever, but too late." "You can't prove any of that," he said suddenly, defiance flaring. "No," said Agatha, stepping aside. "But Bill Wong can." The greenhouse door opened. Bill entered, recorder already running, his expression grim. Bill slid a cream envelope onto the bench, CT, embossed in gold. "Found near the church," he said. "Your handwriting matches the note inside. Mr. Blake, I think we've heard enough." Blake froze. You set me up." "You set yourself up," said Bill. "You just needed an audience." For a moment, the three of them stood in silence, the rain beginning to patter softly on the roof. Then Blake said, with quiet dignity, "I didn't mean to kill her." "No one ever does," said Agatha. Bill moved forward, reading the formal caution. Blake listened, hands trembling slightly, but otherwise composed. When the words ended, he nodded once and allowed himself to be led out into the drizzle. Charles watched them go. "Well, Aggie, you've done it again. Another murderer, another mess of human frailty tidied up. Satisfied?" "Not exactly," she said, looking after them. "It's all so small, isn't it? A man ruins 3 lives over a forged will and a patch of garden." "Property's a powerful motive," said Charles, "especially in the Cotswolds." "Yes," said Agatha. "They'd kill to keep a view and call it preservation." She followed him out of the greenhouse, the scent of honeysuckle fading behind them like an unwelcome ghost. An hour later, with the paperwork underway and Blake in custody, Agatha found herself in Mrs. Bloxby's sitting room, a cup of tea in her hands. Rain tapped gently on the windows, a domestic rhythm against the hush. "It's over then," said the vicar's wife. "Yes," said Agatha. "Bill got his confession. Blake panicked after Claudia threatened to expose him. It wasn't premeditated, just pride and fear and too much self-importance." Mrs. Bloxby sighed. "The roots of most sins." Agatha nodded. He hid behind decency, and she behind virtue. Between them, they managed to make the world uglier, and they both thought they were right. "You sound tired," said Mrs. Bloxby gently. "I am," admitted Agatha. "Every time I solve one of these, I swear I'll stick to gardening and gin. Then someone dies, and I'm back in the mud." "Perhaps because you can't stand not knowing the truth," said Mrs. Bloxby. Agatha smiled faintly. "Or because the truth usually needs a bit of help to come out." They sat in companionable quiet. Outside, the clouds were lifting, thin streams of sunlight reaching across the wet gravestones. "You know," said Mrs. Bloxby after a while, "I always thought honeysuckle was a comforting scent. It makes me think of summer evenings and open windows." "Not me," said Agatha. "I'll never smell it again without thinking of greed and stupidity." "Then perhaps you should plant some," Mrs. Bloxby suggested softly. "Turn it into something living instead of haunting." Agatha gave a short laugh. "Trust you to find redemption in horticulture." "It's the Cotswold way," said Mrs. Bloxby, smiling. Later, at home, Agatha poured herself a modest gin and tonic, medicinal, she told herself, and stood at the window watching the sunset burnish the lane. Fritz the cat twined around her ankles, unimpressed by human morality. Charles arrived uninvited as ever, bearing a takeaway curry and his usual smug grin. "Peace offering," he said, "and congratulations. You've restored justice to the shires once again." "Don't exaggerate," said Agatha, taking the bag. "I just nagged the right man into confessing." "That's your superpower," said Charles, "nagging as art form." She rolled her eyes but poured him a drink anyway. They ate companionably, the curry fragrant, the house warm. "You know," he said between mouthfuls, "you could retire on a high note, give up sleuthing, join a bridge club, terrorize fewer murderers." "And what would you do without me?" she said. "Probably live longer," he murmured, smiling. "Liar." They clinked glasses. Outside, the sky deepened into indigo, and the first stars trembled faintly above the roofs. "It's strange," Agatha said after a while. "I thought I'd feel triumphant, but I just feel sorry for the lot of them. Claudia, Blake, even Harriet. Everyone chasing pride or punishment, when all they wanted was to be noticed." Charles regarded her fondly. "That's the human condition, my dear. The rest of us just drink to forget it." She laughed softly. "Then pour another." He did, and for a moment the world seemed briefly kind again. Small, flawed, but familiar. As he left later, she walked him to the door. The air was fresh, washed clean by rain, and somewhere down the lane a honeysuckle vine trembled in the breeze, its perfume drifting faintly through the night. Agatha inhaled, then smiled wryly. "Trust a man," she muttered, "to murder over property lines, and blame it on pruning." She locked the door, turned off the lights, and let the scent fade behind her. The Cotswolds awoke to that particular kind of morning that only follows rain, silver air, damp hedges, and puddles that reflected the sky with misplaced optimism. Agatha Raisin stood at her gate, cup of tea in hand, surveying Honeysuckle Row as though it had personally conspired to test her nerves. The village, having feasted heartily on gossip for a week, was now returning to its customary diet of small resentments. A neighbour across the lane called out something about heroic deeds, which Agatha dismissed with a curt nod and the faintest twitch of a smile. Roy Silver's article in the Cotswold Chronicle had done its damage. Heroine of Honeysuckle Row, local sleuth solves scandal of the season. He'd even included an illustration, an unflattering sketch of Agatha in what appeared to be a safari jacket and heroic stance. She'd declared it nonsense, loudly and often, but the clipping now occupied a discreet frame on her mantelpiece. "Pure vanity," she muttered to herself. But then, someone ought to keep records for posterity. Charles Fraith's sports car was already parked outside. She found him in her sitting room, sprawled comfortably, sipping her coffee. "Morning, Aggie," he said, smiling that insufferably lazy smile. "I came to say goodbye. I'm off to Italy for a fortnight, a small matter of wine, sunshine, and avoiding responsibility." "You'll excel at all three," said Agatha. And you? What will you do without me? Sleep better, she said briskly. He chuckled. Admit it. You'll miss me. Without my charm, this village will collapse under the weight of its own virtue. Nonsense, she said, though her lips quirked. We've survived far worse. Remember the W.I. Bake-Off scandal? Barely, said Charles, rising. Too many scones, not enough scandal. He hesitated, watching her with genuine affection. You did well, Aggie. You always do. Beneath all the bluster and bad temper, you're rather remarkable. Don't get sentimental, she warned, though a faint warmth rose in her cheeks. Never, he said. He leaned in, kissed her cheek lightly, and murmured, Try not to find another corpse before I get back. Try not to become one, she shot back. He laughed, tipping his hat as he left. The roar of his engine faded down the lane, leaving an odd hush behind. Agatha stood a moment longer by the doorway, then sighed. Damn man, she muttered. Always makes an exit, as if he's on stage. Mrs. Bloxby arrived later, bearing a small pot wrapped in brown paper and twine. I thought you might like this, she said, handing it over. Agatha peeled back the paper. Inside was a young honeysuckle cutting, its green tendrils curling shyly around a bamboo stick. Honeysuckle, Agatha said warily. Isn't that a bit morbid, considering? On the contrary, said Mrs. Bloxby gently. It's for remembrance, not of tragedy, but of endurance. It grows back even after storms. Agatha snorted. So does mildew. Mrs. Bloxby smiled. Then think of it as moral mildew. It reminds us to start again. You always have to sound profound, don't you? Said Agatha, though her voice softened. They sat together over tea and biscuits, the village quiet around them. Rain began again, pattering on the window panes. You must be relieved it's over, said Mrs. Bloxby. Relieved, yes, though it's left a funny taste. I keep thinking about Claudia, how she strutted about pretending superiority, when really she was just lonely. Aren't we all sometimes? Agatha looked into her cup. Perhaps. She hid it behind pride. I hide mine behind sarcasm. Same armour, different polish. At least you know it's armour, said Mrs. Bloxby softly. Agatha gave a short laugh. That's the trouble with you, Bloxby. You turn every cup of tea into a sermon. Only the gentle kind, said the vicar's wife, rising. And you always listen, whether you admit it or not. After she left, the cottage felt too quiet again. Agatha stared at the small honeysuckle pot on the table. The leaves gleamed faintly, stubbornly alive. For remembrance, she murmured. Well, you poor thing, you've no idea what you're in for. She fetched her Mac and went outside. The drizzle had thickened, softening the outlines of the village. Puddles mirrored the cottages, and a blackbird hopped along the fence with self-importance. Agatha found a patch of bare earth beside her gate, knelt with a grunt, and began to dig. Heroine of Honeysuckle Row, she muttered, scooping mud. Honestly, you solve one murder and the world expects sainthood. Fritz the cat appeared, tail erect, inspecting her progress with disdain. Don't smirk, she said. If this dies, I'll blame you. You're supposed to keep rodents away, not vegetation. The rain grew heavier, drumming on her shoulders. She pressed the small plant into the soil, patted it down firmly, and straightened up, wiping her hands on her trousers. The honeysuckle looked unimpressed, thin, defiant, absurdly hopeful. Agatha stood there a while, the damp air cooling her face, and thought about all the nonsense of human pride, forged wills, garden feuds, and lonely women demanding tribute for their pain. And herself, standing in the rain, planting a memory she pretended not to need. When she went back inside, she left the door open for a moment, letting the scent of wet earth drift through. It smelled of endings and beginnings, two things Agatha seldom trusted, but occasionally allowed. She made herself another tea, splashed in a touch of whiskey, and curled into her armchair. Fritz leapt onto her lap with proprietary weight. "You realise," she told him, "I'm far too busy to play at gardening." He yawned extravagantly, which she took for agreement. Her eyes wandered to the framed clipping on the mantel. The bold headline gleamed faintly in the firelight. She smirked, though not without affection. "All right," she said aloud. "Perhaps I'll leave it there a little longer, for the morale of the nation." Outside, the rain softened to a mist. Through the window she could just see the fragile sprig of honeysuckle bending in the breeze, already settling into its new home. She felt the faintest tug of something suspiciously like contentment. It annoyed her. "Still," she told the cat, setting down her cup, "if it grows, perhaps I'll learn patience before it blooms." Fritz blinked at her, unimpressed, and the fire crackled on, cosy and unrepentant.